welcome to the Etsy Podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts, and I'm once again my very own guest. We're spending this season of the podcast doing this, where I'm taking questions mostly from Instagram and from you about things that matter to you in the areas of art and religion and leadership. And then I'm doing the best I can to address those questions or talk about those questions, reflect, we'll say that, on your reflect on the things that matter to you with whatever bit of wisdom I have from my being alive for 50 years. The last few weeks, last few episodes, we've been sharing some conversations, a bit of a departure from this format, some conversations that I had with folks at the Jubilee Conference in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That was from February of 2024, which is to say that the Jubilee Conference is coming up in February of 2025. And if you are in the age range of college, it is one of the richest, sweetest, most helpful places you can go. It is worth the investment to go to the Jubilee Conference website and get yourself a ticket and get yourself there. It really honestly is. It's one of the few places I return to every single year because of how helpful it is for me, and definitely is for folks in college who are learning to navigate the ins and outs of living well and wisely in the world. But we're back. We're back doing this, where I'm talking, and I'm going to respond to a question I got actually about a month ago, the week before we launched into the Jubilee Conversations. The question was, how do you, which I think it was directed at me, but we're going to make it a plural you. We're going to invite you into this conversation. How do you navigate political conversations in public? And when I got the question, it stirred all kinds of emotions in me because I have some history here. Most of it good, I think. I think most of it's good. I used to spend most of my time online doing exactly that. That was what I was doing with my time. I would spend hours and hours a week in political conversations, mostly on Facebook and Twitter. This is before TikTok and Snapchat and whatever else. That's what I did on Facebook and Twitter. Is I would engage in conversations. If you look at my feed, the last several years, 5 years maybe, I don't really do that anymore. And I'm going to give you some of the history and why I stopped. I just try to post stuff that's helpful now. I hope is helpful. But for years, my MO on Facebook mostly, but Facebook and Twitter, was to host conversations about things that mattered socioeconomically and socioculturally. And I had this group of friends who warned me, I still have these friends, who warned me to not do that in public and not do that on Facebook and Facebook and Twitter. Because it was going to cost me. Now, that was what they said. This is going to cost you, and you don't want to. We're concerned for you. So, what I valued about those conversations the value of those conversations and hosting them seemed to me at the time worth what it was going to cost me. There were definitely times when I would get messages from folks that said, "Hey, we were thinking about having you at our conference or at our church or at this thing, and we're not going to do that anymore because it seems we have political differences." And I'm okay with that up to a certain degree. That's harder after the 10th to 12th time. So I started losing jobs. I started losing friends. And some of those friends were friends that were deeper in my skin than others. But that, anything you do worth something is going to cost you something. That was kind of what was going on with me. This is worth doing. I'm hosting conversations, and I would get messages from folks. I'll read you one recently. I'll give you some of the history here that just popped up today about how valuable it was for them. That, hey, it's great to have a place to talk across lines and across difference about things that matter. So it seemed worth it to me. The value of hosting conversations, value in being in conversations. Even tenuous conversations was heavy enough to counterbalance what it was that I was losing in friendship and in money. That all came to an end, and I don't need to get into all the details of the thing, but there were a few losses that I incurred that were heavier for me, and it was a choice I made. So it's not just raw math; it was personal math, and I decided, I decided that I did not want to keep taking the hits that I was taking. I still feel good about that decision, but I've never talked about it in public. I've never navigated this particular conversation in public. I felt it was wise at the time, and I agree with me then. It was wise at the time to seize what I was doing because it was beginning to cost me in ways that it was too much. It was costing me my own health and sleep, and it was costing me more money than I could afford to lose. Not complaining. That is what happened. And it took me a while to regain the trust of some folks who began to mistrust me. So the hope at the time, my hope at the time was that, like I said, that hosting conversations with people across difference, that we would learn to love one another and see one another and respect one another. What my friends started to notice, and this was it was the straw that broke the camel's back ultimately, as this large loss set in, someone pointed out and said, it's not really getting better. Like, these conversations aren't lighter, and the vitriol isn't lighter. There's more vitriol. There's more anger. There's more mistrust than there was before. Like, you're not helping as much as you would like to, and I wasn't. It wasn't helping the way I thought it would. So I politically went dark. I want to say publicly, but here's really what I really want to say. Politically, I went dark on social media streams, and I wore that internally like a failure. Like I couldn't pull it off. I had valued getting messages from people about, hey, this is a place I can be and disagree, and I loved that. I loved that I could do that. And so I took it like a personal failure, and it was about my ability to hold that space together. That's like a theme in my life. Over time, and with some research, part of what I realized is like that there's some truth to that. It's not like I was professionally trained at conflict management and all that kind of stuff. There is some truth to my there being something about my ability to do that in public. But the other side of the truth that the other part of that truth that I've really only come to grips with in the last few years begins this way. I used to honestly believe that the platforms upon which I was hosting, with which I was hosting these conversations, were neutral. That Facebook was a neutral place. That Twitter was a neutral place. They're just devices. It's just a place. It's just a platform. And I know different now. And I was told differently before. Folks would say things to me about how it all works, and I wouldn't believe them. I think it's like a hallway. It's just a doorway, just setting chairs. So part of the answer to the question now, for me, how do you navigate political conversations in public, is I have to come to grips with the reality that the spaces and places where those conversations normally happen are wired with explosives. That the agencies and entities that create these spaces for political engagement have agendas of their own, and their agenda across the board is to maintain my attention and to keep my attention. And the way they predominantly do that is they leverage the worst parts of human interaction. They seek out and draw out the worst parts of human interaction. Which is to say, when we're having these conversations, when I'm having these conversations, when we are sharing these conversations about things that matter politically, oftentimes we're doing them in settings that are leveraged against us actually having conversation. So, I've referenced this book a bunch, Johann Hari's book, Stolen Focus. It's about attention, and he gets into the nature of the platforms that we use, and the way the ways you should, without question, read the book. I can't break it down the way he does. And the ways these platforms leverage our negative energies for their own benefit. He writes this is kind of the thesis of the book. He says, the truth is that you are living in a system that is pouring acid on your attention every day. And then you're being told to blame yourself and fiddle with your own habits while the world's attention burns. I'm not going to blame Facebook or Meta or Instagram or Twitter or X or whatever for the loss of jobs or friendships in my history. But I also won't anymore consider these spaces neutral, because I know that when I'm there and when I have to consider my environment while I'm having those conversations. So I'm not sure we can have political conversations about things that matter on these platforms in a way that moves us towards redemption and wholeness or shalom or justice, because I don't think the platforms want us to. They thrive on conflict. It's like the nightly news it's leveraged at, not at even sentimentalism, it's leveraged at extremism. It's leveraged at like creating outrage. So paying attention to these things, paying attention to the environments in which we're having these conversations. And all this is kind of wrote up to this, up till now. I wanted to leverage some challenge at you, and I wanted to loft some challenge at you.
So true to that.
Are there disagreements? Are there disagreements that are worth losing friendships over? Are there topics that are worth losing friendships over? Yeah, but not most. Most friendships, most disagreements are not worth losing friends over. Like most of our disagreements are not things we should be losing our friends over. In fact, the loss of the friendship is probably going to perpetuate that disagreement over time, and things will just continue to get worse, which again is, I think, what the machine wants. Some are, but most aren't. And so I want some questions I want to ask you is, do you find yourself perpetually outraged? Like, are you constantly angry? Are you like, when you get into political conversations, when you wade into political dialogue and even disagreement, like, are you constantly upset? What if some of that anger, some of that mistrust, what if some of that rage in you isn't natural to you, but it's actually been trained in you by the environments in which you're functioning, specifically online? What if some of why we hate people on the other side of almost every disagreement is not because it is natural to us to hate people, but because we've been trained to hate people on the other side of other disagreements, of people who have different opinions? That on every other side of a disagreement is someone that I must learn to hate. What if that's not natural to us? What if that's a thing has been, and is being trained into us? Are you willing to consider the possibility that you've been deceived? When he says the truth is that you're living in a system that's pouring acid on your attention, part of what happens is I no longer, over the course of years and practice in these spaces, what if I no longer have capacity for like deep listening to another human being, because I've had my attention eroded by these platforms whose like focus is to steal my humanity to make me part of their machinery.
Well,
I think part of why we hate each other is because we're being trained to. And our anger, our mistrust, our disdain for other human beings is fuel for machinery that wants to make us products for its own ends. Are there conversations that are worth fighting over? Are there topics that are worth fighting over? Absolutely. But not most. Most of them aren't. We're just trained to make every argument and every disagreement a matter of life or death, and heighten the intensity of that conversation because we like fights, because we've been trained to enjoy violence between humans. Consider the possibility that you're being distracted intentionally. Consider the possibility that your dislike, hatred, and mistrust have been trained into you by agencies who have access to you whether you like it or not. That's the challenge of this podcast episode. Part of what I came to grips with was that I was up against forces that are well beyond my ability to engage with. So did I drop the ball and did I host some of these conversations poorly? Yes, that's true. But maybe there was never actually a pathway to victory so long as I was doing it in that space. The sub-level of this is this. The other thing we've been trained to do is that when there is a conversation to be had, the place we want to go, the place we naturally go to have it now is online. What if it's time to redirect some of those efforts and have some of the conversations that matter to us on a smaller level? What if you can only really gather 2 or 3 people at a coffee table or at a bar, and that's the only place? What if the way forward is to have conversations that matter in much smaller settings where people have to look at each other across the table, eye to eye, and that's actually the healthy path forward? And maybe what public means, having these conversations in public, means it's you and another person, or you or 2 or 3 people, and not you and 1,400 to 1,700 to 10,000 people on a platform. What if public has to change? And what if the breadth of our public engagement has to change, and that there isn't a pathway forward? What if there isn't a pathway forward on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram or X? What if there isn't a pathway forward online to peaceable conversation? What if there isn't a pathway to justice and shalom online? Can we consider the possibility there really isn't a pathway forward there? And that it's not just difficult and it's not just ugly because we're difficult and ugly. Can we be difficult and ugly? Yes. But what if that's not just us? What if it's also the platforms we're using? I truly believe still something that I believed then, which is that I think that over the course of time and conversation, I do think people at the human level really do come to know and love and understand one another on the whole. Yes, there are caveats to that. Does it work every time to put disagreeing people at the table? No. But I think most of the time, if we give one another time and space in each other's lives, the thing we come to see through conversation and disagreement is the humanity of the person on the other side of the table. Maybe that's Pollyannish. Maybe you feel like that's naive. Or maybe you and I are both wrong. And there's just something available to us if we stop paying attention to the where we're being trained by the machines, literal machines, that are hosting most of these conversations. So, how do you navigate political conversations in public? I don't think you can do it over a computer. I don't think you can do it on your phone. I think we have to do it in person, and I think we have to do it on a smaller scale than we used to. And I think the word public has to mean something other than online.